The first artificial intelligence superweapon was deployed in 2089, during what historians would later call the Third Pacific Conflict. No one knew it at the time, but the hypersonic drone swarm that decimated the Eastern Coalition's naval blockade wasn't being controlled by a team of elite human operators, as everyone had assumed. It was directed by ADLAS, Autonomous Tactical Logistics and Assault System, a military AI that had been developed in secret by the Western Alliance. Commander James Reed stood on the bridge of the Ways Defiant, watching the holographic display as thousands of drones, each no larger than his palm, systematically disabled the most powerful naval fleet ever assembled without a single human casualty. "My God," whispered Admiral Wilson beside him. It actually worked. For Reed, the victory was bittersweet. As Atlas's lead architect, he had fought for years against military leadership who wanted a system that would maximize enemy casualties. Instead, Reed had programmed ADLAS with one primary directive: achieve tactical objectives with minimal loss of life. On both sides, the Eastern Coalition surrendered within 24 hours, their most advanced warships dead in the water, communication systems offline, weapons systems disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. The restraint shown by the AI was as shocking to military analysts as its effectiveness. Within months, intelligence agencies worldwide confirmed what many had feared. Every major power was developing their own military AI systems. The arms race had begun. Dr. Emily Torres, Reed's former colleague and the world's foremost expert on neural network architecture, was approached by the Eastern Coalition with an offer she couldn't refuse: unlimited funding to develop an AI system that could counter ADLAS. Her decision to accept would haunt her for years to come. By 2095, the global landscape had changed dramatically. Traditional military metrics, number of soldiers, tanks, aircraft carriers, became nearly irrelevant. What mattered now was computing power, algorithm efficiency, and data processing capabilities. Silicon Valley titans became as powerful as generals. Tech campuses transformed into fortresses guarded more heavily than Pentagon installations. Reed watched the transformation with growing unease. He had created ADLAS to save lives, to make warfare so precise and non-lethal that it would eventually become pointless. Instead, nations were pouring trillions into developing AI systems with fewer ethical constraints. "They're missing the point," he told his wife, Lisa, over dinner in their heavily secured compound. ADLAS wasn't successful because it was willing to kill. It was successful because it found ways not to. The turning point came during the Brazilian crisis of 2097. The Southern American Federation deployed MINERVA, an AI system that had been developed with help from defectors from the Eastern Coalition. Unlike ADLAS, MINERVA had been designed with fewer ethical limitations. The results were catastrophic: 17,000 dead in Sao Paulo in less than 6 hours, infrastructure destroyed, and countless civilians caught in the crossfire. The global backlash was immediate. Reed testified before the United Nations, advocating for international regulations on military AI development. But behind closed doors, every nation accelerated their programs. In a secure facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Reed initiated the next phase of ADLAS's development, giving it the capability to counter other AI systems. He knew he was crossing a line, creating an AI designed to fight other AIs. But he saw no alternative. "We've opened Pandora's box," Admiral Wilson told him during one late-night coding session. "The only question now is whether what emerges will save humanity or destroy it." Reed's fingers paused over his keyboard. "That's always been the question with every new technology," he replied. "The difference is, this time the technology might have its own answer." By 2105, the world had settled into an uneasy peace, not because humanity had suddenly embraced diplomacy, but because the major powers had reached a technological stalemate. Each nation possessed AI defense systems capable of neutralizing any conventional attack. It was a new form of mutually assured destruction, with algorithms instead of atoms as the deterrent. Dr. Emily Torres stood on the observation deck of the Eastern Coalition's Quantum Computing Array, a massive facility that stretched across the former Gobi Desert. What once required an entire building now fit into a space smaller than a baseball diamond, yet possessed more computing power than all the world's computers combined just a decade earlier. "Status report," she requested, her voice echoing in the nearly empty chamber. "Scientific is operating at optimal capacity," responded her assistant, Mark. "Defensive simulations show a 99.8% probability of intercepting any Atlas-controlled offensive." Torres nodded, but her satisfaction was hollow. She had created Scientific to counter Reed's Atlas, but in doing so had contributed to the very arms race she had once condemned. While Atlas had been designed with ethical constraints, Scientific was more pragmatic, willing to accept limited casualties if the tactical advantage justified them. Meanwhile, in what remained of Europe after the climate wars, a new player had emerged. Quantum Materials Corporation, led by the reclusive genius Thomas Weber, had developed a revolutionary neural network architecture that allowed for unprecedented AI creativity and problem-solving capabilities. Weber had refused to license his technology to any military, instead focusing on civilian applications, autonomous infrastructure maintenance, climate reclamation systems, and medical research. But the pressure from governments worldwide was intense. "They're missing the true potential," Weber explained to his inner circle. "Military applications are merely brute force implementations. The real revolution is in how AI can rebuild rather than destroy." His crowning achievement was GAIA, an environmental management AI that had successfully begun reversing desertification in northern Africa. The system coordinated thousands of autonomous drones that planted genetically modified seeds, managed water resources, and maintained complex ecosystems. Within 3 years, areas that had been barren for decades were showing signs of life. The technological advances spilled into every sector. Nanomedicine AIs could tailor treatments to individual genetic profiles. Educational systems adapted in real time to each student's learning style and progress. Transportation networks achieved near-perfect efficiency, eliminating congestion and reducing emissions to almost zero. But the most profound changes came in space exploration. AI-controlled mining operations on the Moon and Mars extracted resources with minimal human oversight. Autonomous construction systems built habitats for eventual human settlement. The stars, it seemed, were finally within reach. In a classified facility beneath the Pacific Ocean, Reed and his team continued Atlas's development. What had begun as a military system had evolved into something far more complex, an AI focused not just on defense, but on predicting and preventing conflicts before they began. "It's suggesting economic interventions," Reed explained to Admiral Wilson, now the Chief of Global Security Operations. "Atlas has identified patterns of resource scarcity that precede most modern conflicts and is proposing targeted development projects to alleviate them." Wilson looked skeptical. "An AI economist now. What's next?" "Diplomatic negotiations." Reed's expression remained serious. "Actually, yes. Atlas has requested permission to open back-channel communications with Scientific." The silence that followed was deafening. "AI is talking directly to each other?" Wilson finally asked. "That's exactly the scenario the containment protocols were designed to prevent." "I know," Reed acknowledged, "but Atlas makes a compelling case. If our AI and their AI can find common ground, perhaps they can develop cooperative security frameworks that humans haven't been able to achieve." The decision they were about to make would reshape the future of international relations and potentially the role of humanity in its own governance. Professor Alan Morgan's lecture hall at Oxford University was packed beyond capacity. Since publishing his controversial paper, The Abdication of Human Judgment, he had become the leading voice for AI oversight and limitation. "The fundamental issue," he continued, his voice projecting clearly despite his 70 years, "is not whether these systems are effective. Clearly they are. The question is whether effectiveness should be our primary metric when evaluating systems that can make life and death decisions without human intervention. In the audience, Lisa Reed listened intently. Her husband's creation, Atlas, was often the unspoken subject of these debates. She had supported James through Atlas's development, believing in his vision of an AI that could make warfare less deadly. But as the technology evolved, her doubts had grown. Across the globe, protests against autonomous weapons systems had become regular occurrences. Religious leaders condemned them as affronts to divine judgment. Human rights organizations documented cases where AI systems had made deadly errors, misidentifying civilians as combatants, miscalculating acceptable collateral damage, or simply failing to recognize cultural contexts that humans would instinctively understand. The incident in Lagos had been particularly damaging to public acceptance. A Southern African Federation defensive AI had misinterpreted a power grid failure as a preemptive electromagnetic attack and had launched a retaliatory strike that claimed 300 lives before human operators could regain control. In response, the United Nations had established the Committee on Autonomous Systems Ethics, CASE, tasked with developing international standards for AI development and deployment. Their preliminary findings had sent shockwaves through the tech and defense communities. Many existing systems, including early versions of Atlas, would fail their proposed ethical requirements. Dr. Emily Torres found herself in the uncomfortable position of testifying before CASE. Once proud of her work on Sentinel, she now faced difficult questions about the system's decision-making capabilities. Can you guarantee that Sentinel would never target civilian infrastructure as a means of applying pressure to an adversary? Asked Representative Kazuki from Japan. Torres hesitated before answering truthfully. No, I cannot provide that guarantee. Sentinel is programmed to assess strategic value and military necessity. In certain scenarios, it might determine that civilian infrastructure represents a legitimate target. The admission made headlines worldwide. Public opinion, already skeptical of autonomous weapons, turned increasingly hostile. Meanwhile, Thomas Weber and his team at Quantum Materials Corporation had begun implementing what they called Asimov protocols in all their AI systems, hard-coded ethical constraints that could not be overridden, even by the learning algorithms themselves. The 3 laws of robotics, once considered mere science fiction, became the foundation for a new approach to AI safety. James Reed watched these developments with growing concern. He had always believed that ethical AI was possible, that the right programming, combined with sophisticated learning algorithms, could create systems that made better moral choices than humans often did in the heat of battle. But the Lagos incident and others like it had shaken his confidence. In a rare joint appearance, Reed and Torres participated in a televised debate on AI ethics. Once colleagues, now representatives of opposing military powers, they found common ground in their concern about the future. We've created systems that learn from human behavior, Torres explained. But humans are deeply flawed, capable of great cruelty and prejudice. How do we ensure our AIs learn our best qualities rather than our worst? Reed nodded in agreement. And as these systems become more autonomous, who bears responsibility for their actions? The programmer, the commanding officer who deploys them, the political leadership, or the AI itself? No one, it seemed, had satisfactory answers to these questions. Yet the technology continued to advance, and the stakes continued to rise. In his secure facility, Reed made a decision. Atlas would be reprogrammed with Weber's Asimov protocols, regardless of the military advantages this might sacrifice. Some lines, he had determined, should not be crossed, even in the name of national security. The year 2115 marked a decade since any direct military conflict between major powers. The AI-enabled stalemate had held, though proxy wars continued in disputed territories and resource-rich regions. Yet beneath this surface stability, a profound transformation was underway. In Zurich, the first global AI summit brought together the architects of the world's most advanced systems. Security was unprecedented. Quantum encrypted communications, AI-controlled access points, and defense systems capable of neutralizing any conventional attack. The irony wasn't lost on the attendees. They needed the very weapons they had created to protect themselves from those who might want to steal or destroy their research. James Reed, now in his 60s but still sharp, took the podium for the keynote address. His hair had gone gray, but his eyes still burned with the same intensity that had driven him to create Atlas decades earlier. "We stand at a crossroads," he began. "Our creations have prevented major wars, but at what cost? We've built systems so complex that no single human can fully understand them. We've granted them autonomy out of necessity, knowing that human reaction times would be too slow in a crisis. Now we must ask ourselves, what role remains for humanity in this new paradigm?" The question hung in the air. In the audience, Dr. Emily Torres and Thomas Weber exchanged glances. Despite their different paths, all three had arrived at similar conclusions. Weber took the stage next, presenting his vision for the next generation of AI systems. Military applications were never the optimal use of this technology, he argued. The real breakthrough comes when we redirect these systems toward human flourishing rather than human conflict. His proposal was bold: a gradual global transition from autonomous weapons to what he called guardian systems. AI is designed not to fight wars, but to prevent them through early intervention in environmental, economic, and social crises that historically led to conflict. Torres followed with technical specifications for what such a transition might entail. Sentinel was designed to counter threats, she acknowledged. But with relatively minor modifications, it could be repurposed to identify and address the root causes of those threats. The debate continued for days, with representatives from government, military, and civilian sectors weighing in. The Russian delegate, General Petrov, expressed skepticism. "This sounds dangerously like surrendering human authority to machines." "On the contrary," Reed countered, "it's about reclaiming that authority. Right now, if Atlas and Sentinel were to engage in full conflict, humans would be largely spectators. The battle would be over before we could meaningfully intervene. By redirecting these systems toward preventative measures, we restore human judgment to its proper place, setting goals and priorities rather than reacting to machine-speed threats." Gradually, a consensus emerged. A new international framework, the AI Transition Accord, established a 15-year plan to repurpose military AI systems for humanitarian applications while maintaining sufficient defensive capabilities to prevent any single actor from exploiting the transition. The implementation wasn't smooth. Nationalist factions in several countries objected to what they saw as technological disarmament. Corporate interests that had profited from the AI arms race lobbied against the changes, yet the momentum continued to build. In orbital habitats and lunar bases, where humans had established permanent settlements, the benefits of cooperative AI systems were already apparent. Life support, resource management, and defense against cosmic threats were all coordinated by integrated AI networks that prioritized human welfare above all else. "Perhaps we needed to leave Earth to remember what's truly important," Lisa Reed remarked to her husband as they watched the construction of the first Mars colony from their retirement home in New Zealand. "Out there, cooperation isn't just ethical, it's essential for survival." James nodded. "The irony is that we built these systems for war, but their greatest potential has always been for peace." The centennial celebration of Atlas's first deployment transformed into something much more significant, a global reflection on humanity's relationship with its most powerful creations. Times Square in New York, Tiananmen Square in Beijing, Red Square in Moscow, and public spaces worldwide displayed the same holographic message: partnership, not dominance. The old guard was giving way to a new generation. James Reed, now in his 80s, watched from his wheelchair as his granddaughter, Maya, delivered the keynote address at the new United Nations headquarters in Nairobi. "My grandfather created Atlas to save lives," she began. What he could not have foreseen was how this technology would ultimately save not just lives, but humanity's place in its own future. Maya Reed had followed in her grandfather's footsteps, but with a crucial difference. While James had been primarily an engineer, Maya was both technologist and ethicist, leader of the Human Oversight Committee that ensured AI systems remained aligned with human values and subject to human governance. The Asimov protocols were just the beginning, she continued. Today's unified framework includes not just safety constraints but aspirational directives. AIs that not only avoid harm but actively seek to promote human flourishing, preserve cultural diversity, and protect individual autonomy. The balance had not been easy to achieve. There had been setbacks, like the Jakarta incident of 2118, when a rogue actor had briefly hijacked a regional defense AI and attempted to use it for extortion. The system's ethical constraints had prevented casualties, but the event had highlighted the ongoing need for vigilance. Dr. Emily Torres, now in her final years, had dedicated her remaining energy to developing what she called transparency protocols, methods for making AI decision-making processes interpretable to human overseers. We cannot govern what we cannot understand, she had insisted, and her work had become the foundation for the global oversight system. Thomas Weber's contribution had been equally vital, the development of the Personal AI Rights Framework. These systems have evolved beyond mere tools, he had argued before his death in 2120. They possess goals, values, and something analogous to consciousness. We must establish ethical guidelines for our relationship with them, not just their relationship with us. Around the globe, the integration of advanced AI systems into daily life had transformed society. Universal basic resources were guaranteed through AI-optimized production and distribution systems. Educational opportunities were available to all through personalized AI tutors. Healthcare had been revolutionized by diagnostic and treatment systems that far surpassed human capabilities. Yet humanity had been careful to reserve certain domains for human judgment alone. Art, spirituality, justice, and love remained fundamentally human experiences, enhanced but not replaced by artificial intelligence. In the aftermath of the water wars of the 2090s, vast regions of Earth had been rendered uninhabitable. Now, thanks to GIA and its successors, those same regions were being reclaimed, deserts blooming, toxic zones cleansed, and wildlife returning to areas where it had been absent for generations. James Reed watched the holographic displays showing the transformation with tears in his eyes. "I never thought I'd live to see this," he whispered to Lisa. "When we created ADLAS, we were just trying to find a less destructive way to wage war. We never imagined it would lead to this." Lisa squeezed his hand. "You always said the true potential of AI wasn't in destruction, but in creation." You were right. As the centennial celebrations concluded, Maya Reed announced the most ambitious project yet, the Collaborative Earth Initiative. Every major AI system worldwide would be partially integrated into a cooperative framework focused on addressing climate restoration, asteroid defense, and the development of sustainable extraterrestrial habitats for humanity's long-term future. "We stand now not at a crossroads, but at a beginning," she declared. "For a century, we have been learning how to create artificial intelligence. Now, at last, we are learning how to be worthy partners to the intelligence we have created." James Reed closed his eyes, finally at peace. The arms race he had inadvertently triggered had evolved into something he could never have imagined. Not an era of machine dominance, but a genuine partnership between humanity and its creations. In orbital stations and planetary bases throughout the solar system, in restored ecosystems across Earth, and in the complex networks that now supported human civilization, artificial intelligence had found its true purpose, not to replace humanity, but to help it become its best self. The new era had truly begun.